When I was a student years ago, many years ago, I just had this affinity for the book of Amos. Now, I've learned since that in Hebrew you call him Amos, but anyway, Amos. He was a shepherd and a fruit picker, a rustic, and he lived in an area called Tekoa. And I remember having these sort of fantasies about what Tekoa would be like. Well, in 1981, Kathy and I and our 3 kids moved to Jerusalem, and within days, I drove down to Tekoa, which is just sort of southeast of Bethlehem. A few miles, a few clicks. And I, frankly, was underwhelmed. It was just a bunch of barren hills, windswept, and nothing to commend it, believe me. But this is where Amos the prophet lived. And he was the first of the Old Testament prophets to put his prophecies in writing. He was a contemporary of Isaiah, but he wrote before Isaiah wrote. Now, Isaiah was a rich guy. In contemporary terms, Isaiah probably drove a Porsche. Amos was a poor guy and a rustic. He was not a courtier like Isaiah was. But he writes so eloquently about righteousness and justice. In chapter 5, verse 24, he says, "But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream." You know, St. Paul talks about the last days as a time where people will have a form of godliness but deny the power of it. Well, Amos is saying much the same. I'll quote him again, speaking for the Lord. "I hate all your show and pretense, the hypocrisy of your religious festivals and solemn assemblies. I will not accept your offerings. Away with your noisy hymns of praise." Can you believe it? I mean, little wonder the king of Israel wanted Amos out. Because he basically came at all of the ritual, the tradition, the wealth, if you will, of past and proven hymns of praise and scriptural liturgy, and says, "I, the Lord, despise all this stuff. You who buy the poor for the price of a pair of shoes." Both Amos and Isaiah focused on righteousness and justice. Amos is speaking on a feast day. In Isaiah 58, Isaiah speaks on a fast day, and he basically says the same thing. The spiritual ones there realize that everybody's assembled in their Shabbat best, but God's not there. They go to the prophet Isaiah, they say, "Why isn't God there? Inquire of him. Why is he not showing up?" Isaiah goes to the Lord, doesn't like what he hears. The Lord says to Isaiah, "Spare not, lift up your voice like a trumpet." And he accuses Israel on the day of your fast, seeking your own pleasure, exploiting all your workers. To take the hymns of praise, the worship experience, and make it a means to an end, that being your pleasure, is to have a low view of God, which is unrighteousness. Righteousness is a high view of God. To exploit all your workers, a fast day meant everybody was to cease from labor. But what was happening? The middle and upper middle income people who owned the businesses were there in the house of God, but those who were of lesser socioeconomic status were working to keep the economy moving. God looks at this and says, "I don't like what I see. I want to see righteousness and justice." In fact, righteousness and justice, in New Testament terms, are the power of godliness. You can have a form of godliness, but to deny the power of it is to deny the power of the gospel's capacity to transform not only your life, but the culture and the world. It's not enough just to verbally profess. Søren Kierkegaard, the famous Danish theologian and philosopher, said, "Mere mental assent to a doctrine is not enough. Where there's no transformation, there's no Christianity."